Hi everyone, this is Jenny and I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to be doing my April wrap-up. I actually, as it seems like has happened to some other people here on BookTube, have been reading quite a lot during the month of April. I had a pretty good end of reading month in March. I wasn't too affected by kind of an inability to read like I think other people were, but during April I have just been reading up a storm. I'm not working right now, so I think that has given me a lot more time to read. So really all I've been doing is like studying for the GRE, reading, and cooking. So lots and lots of time to read, which means that I've read 16 books and will likely finish another one before the month is over. So since I've read an absurd number of books, I think the most I've ever read in a single month, I wanted to make a two-part April wrap-up. So today I'm going to be doing my O.W.L.s wrap-up. I will put a link to my April TBR where I talk a bit more about the O.W.L.s and what I was planning to read. And then tomorrow, if all things go according to plan, you should see the rest of my wrap-up. So that's what I'm currently reading, as well as all the books that didn't fit into an O.W.L.s prompt. So look out for that tomorrow. This should be going up on the 30th of April, and then my part 2 will be on the 1st of May. So let's just get into it, starting with my O.W.L.s. So as I said in my April TBR, I plan to read for 5 different O.W.L.s based on the 3 careers that I was interested in. I actually ended up reading 9 books that fit the O.W.L.s prompts, so let's just get into them. So the first book I read, I actually don't have with me, but I'll put a picture right here, and that is Luck of the Draw by Kate Clayborn. This is published by Kensington Publishing and is the second in the Chance of a Lifetime series, which is a romance series about these 3 best friends who happen to win the lottery, and then each is their story of like a romance that happens post them winning the lottery. These are really fun contemporary romances. I'm pretty sure they're all enemies to lovers. I know the first one, Beginner's Luck, was a hate to love, and this one, Luck of the Draw, was also hate to love. I'm not sure about the third one. It seems from the synopsis that it is, but I will check back in when I have read it. So Luck of the Draw follows Zoe, who is formerly a corporate attorney. She represented different companies, like pharmaceutical companies is the kind of genre of companies that is represented within the novel, basically helping people or giving people money for like wrongful death cases. So not great like super ethical moral work, which is something that's explored a lot throughout the book, is how she feels about the type of work that she was doing and what does she really want to be doing with her law degree. And in this she decides post lottery that she is going to make moral amends with a lot of things that she feels she has done wrong in her past, one of which is asking this family for forgiveness who she gave a large amount of money to after their son died of an overdose. So when she goes to their house in this like small made-up town in Virginia where all 3 of these books are set, she actually runs across Aiden, who is the twin brother of the boy whose name I can't remember. I believe it's Alex. I'll correct it right here if that's not right. But she runs into Aiden, who obviously is grieving the loss of his brother, and kind of the change of his family dynamics, and through a random kind of course of events ends up actually helping Aiden with trying to win a like summer camp nearby that Aiden is hoping to turn into a like rehabilitation wilderness camp facility. Okay, editing Jenny here. I just wanted to pop in to say that they are also pretending to be engaged. I feel like that's an important thing to know about any romance novel, since that's a classic trope. So they are winning this camp by pretending to be engaged. So just to clarify that. And so it has this really fun like camp setting because they go to the camp for every weekend for like 6 weeks, and that's kind of how they fall in love. It also has this kind of really interesting more deeper like moral dilemmas of what do I do with my life now that money's not a constraint. So yeah, I really enjoy this romance series. I think Kate Clayborn writes really smart romances. They're not the most diverse romances, which I know a lot of people are looking for here on BookTube, but I really enjoy reading them. As I said, I think her female leads are often really smart. The men are like enjoyable to read about, and they also have like kind of a nice balance of like, you know, steaminess, if you will, based on like the main characters being two adults that are like exploring the compatibility of a relationship. I would highly recommend them. I don't see them talk too much about here on BookTube. I know Kate Claiborne has a more recent release called Love Lettering that I've not read, but I see it talked about more often on BookTube, but I would highly recommend and Luck of the Draw I read for the astronomy prompt, which was to read a book mostly at night, which was actually surprisingly challenging because I kept wanting to read it during the day because I was enjoying it so much, so it was not the best pick, but I did read it mostly at night. Okay, so the next book I do have a physical copy of, and it is 1,000 Mornings Poems by Mary Oliver. This was published by Penguin Press and is a later collection of Oliver's. She died, I believe, back in 2016 or 2017. And this was one of the last collections that she published before she passed away. And I really enjoyed these ones. I really like Mary Oliver as a poet. She talks a lot about themes of nature and kind of solitude within nature, finding peace in nature, which are all things I really vibe with. She's also just very approachable as a poet, and also as an essayist. I think if you're kind of new to poetry, she's a nice place to start, just because her poems are very simple. There's not a whole lot to them, but I think they could like draw a lot of meaning for a lot of different people. So I gave this 4 stars. It'd been sitting on my shelf for a long time, and I'm glad that I finally read it. And I read this one for the potions prompt, which was to read a book less than 150 pages. The next book I have is Woman in Moonlight by Isabel Ibanez. This was published by Page Street Books and was one of my anticipated releases of 2020. This is a debut YA fantasy release, and this tells the story of Ximena is how I want to pronounce her name. I'm not entirely sure. I'll put the way that it's spelled right here. And if anyone knows the correct pronunciation, please let me know. And it follows Ximena as she undergoes kind of a mystery spy mission as a decoy princess, which is who she has kind of been training to be, this like stand-in princess to protect the kind of true princess of the Illustrians, who are this group of people that have recently been conquered by the Inaskians in a kind of Bolivian culture type setting. And so Ximena goes to the Inaskian royal palace to determine what the King Atok is kind of planning for the Illustrians, and to perhaps overthrow him so that the Illustrians can return to power. And I thought this was okay. It read very YA to me, in that it was very fast moving. There wasn't a ton of like character development, but the plot was like really moving quickly, so it was a pretty fast read in that sense. Which YA that features kind of more of that and less of the like slower character setting development is not something I usually vibe with too well. Additionally, this also had a very like YA type romance in that it like appeared a bit out of nowhere and I wasn't really anticipating it. But I did really like the use of Bolivian culture and history in this, as well as the discussion surrounding like oppressors versus being oppressed, and how that's a lot more complex than like these people were in power and now they don't have power and that's terrible, in that the people in power are always going to kind of have greed, and not the people that are not in power are always going to think negatively of the people in power, and vice versa. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of discussion. I wish it had been explored a bit more of kind of the nuances of what the Illustrian reign was like, but that might be explored more in the second book. This is a duology, so, but it was kind of, you know, mentioned here, but not fully explored, I felt like. But I did really like the kind of use of that theme. I think it's really interesting kind of topic that is not discussed all that often. So in the end, I gave this 3 stars, maybe 3.5 stars. It was fine. I think if the synopsis interests you and if you are into like diverse YA fantasy, you would probably really like this. It just didn't really grab my attention in the way that I wanted it to. And I read this for Care of Magical Creatures, a book with a beak on the cover, which it has like several birds on the cover. So that worked for this prompt. The next 2 books I'm actually not going to talk about in depth because I've already made a video discussing the 2 of them and how they are related. I will put a link to that video in the cards, which will be up here as well as in the description box below. But that was Real Life by Brandon Taylor, which I read for Muggle Studies or Read a Contemporary. This was published by Riverhead, which is one of my favorite publishers, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. Gave this 5 stars. Really, really good. And then also Days of Distraction by Alexander Chang, which I read for Charms, which was read a book with a white cover. This one is published by Echo, which is probably my other favorite publisher, and this one I gave 4 stars. Really, really recommend. And both of these are very autobiographical novels that feature a person of color as a protagonist, who is dealing with different aspects of their like racial, cultural, and gender identity. So really good books. Both of them would highly recommend. The next book I have to talk about is my autobiography of Carson McCullers by Jen Shapland. I actually met Shapland at an event back in February, and she signed my book, which is exciting. And when I went to that event, which was like this very small event, it was like a very rainy night here in Atlanta, and there were like 10 people there maybe, and like 8 of them were from this the like moderator's class, because she teaches at one of the universities here. So it was a very small event, but a really, really cool event in that Jen Shapland is just like a very intelligent person, and spoke very eloquently, and so I really enjoyed that event. Was very excited about this book, and I would say it did not disappoint. So this is published by Tin House. It's a debut release from Jen Shapland. It's basically part memoir of Jen Shapland, part biography of Carson McCullers, part queer history / queer theory, and part literary criticism. So it's really quite genre bending, and it is told in these like very short vignettes. Yeah, so it's like told in these very short vignettes, which are like, 2-3 pages. Some of them are like only a couple sentences. And basically it explores Carson McCullers' life from her birth and growing up in Columbus, Georgia, to her time spent in New York City and upstate New York, and then to her like later years where she was involved in therapy, and later died because of her various different chronic illnesses that she had. And I'm a huge fan of Carson McCullers. I read her first back in my senior year of high school, and since I've read a couple other things by her. She's a great like Southern classic modern writer. If you haven't checked her out, I would highly recommend. And this basically charts Jen Shapland's exploration of Carson McCullers as an author, discovering her during her graduate program, and then going to actually live at her house in Columbus, which is now a museum, where I guess they have like a writer in residence. So Jen Shapland was part of that. But it also, in exploring Jen Shapland's life and kind of coming to terms with her queer identity, and also kind of moving through graduate school and determining if academia is right for her. We also have this biography of Carson McCullers' life. And then the most interesting aspect is kind of the critiques of the biography genre and like what it does in kind of the public sphere as well as like the academic sphere, which I thought was really, really fascinating stuff, especially in thinking about questions of like who gets to tell this person's story. Throughout the book, Jen Shapland is making this argument that like Carson McCullers has been repeatedly kind of whitewashed, I guess straight washed, if you will, when there's like lots of evidence that she was a queer person who had relationships with women. And basically kind of how do we as biographers and as historians interact with personal documents, interact with the story that the person wants to be told, and kind of how much of that should we consider when we're telling this person's story who died a long time ago. All of that I thought was just like really, really interesting. I will say though, it was interesting that she has so much of that in here, and yet she also falls herself into a lot of those tropes of trying to prove the point of something being like absolutely true about Carson McCullers, when it's like, you were just saying that we can never know for sure something was actually true about a person that we're writing a biography about. So that was interesting. It was kind of an interesting like paradox within the book. And it also made me really excited about You Never Forget Your First, a biography of George Washington by Alexis Coe, which I think does a little less of this because it's more like a true traditional biography. But in the introduction, I'm pretty sure Alexis Coe does talk about like biography as a genre, given that she is the first woman to ever write like a published kind of like full-length biography of like George Washington himself, as opposed to like his wife Martha or his slaves or anything like that, like actually of George Washington. And I think she talks about that too, of like the lens of like the feminine lens looking at this masculine or kind of demasculinizing George Washington. So I'm excited to read this one, in part because I think this one will have given me like some interesting tools to think about in terms of biography. So this was probably one of the most thought-provoking reads of the month. I really, really enjoyed it. I think if you know Carson McCullers or you really like memoir, and like kind of literature in general, I feel like you would find this really thought-provoking and interesting. So gave this 4 stars, would highly recommend. And I read this for the herbology prompt, which was to read a book that starts with M. So my autobiography of Carson McCullers starts with M. So there we go. The next book that I read for my owls was Valentine by Elizabeth Whittmore. This was one of my book of the month picks this month. I had not heard of this book before book of the month had it. And I'm really excited that they had it because it was really good. So this is a debut novel published by Harper, which is another publisher that I really like. They're Barbara Kingsolver's publisher, which is mostly why I like them. But this was a really, really interesting and well-written debut novel. So it basically reads as kind of interconnected short stories, in that we follow 6 or 7 different women all living in a small town in West Texas in the 1970s, 1976 to be specific, as they kind of grapple with their town growing towards an oil boom that is soon coming, as well as face the trial of a white man who has been accused and who like very much did rape a 14-year-old Mexican girl who is a native of the town. And this sexual assault was incredibly brutal. It doesn't happen on page, but the novel begins with her, Gloria, or Glory as she decides she wants to be known after the event occurs, waking up from the kind of night of and traveling several miles to one of the protagonist's house to kind of seek shelter and help against the man because he was going to kill her. So it starts off very dramatically and it has that kind of threading all of the characters together, but is much more kind of introspective than that. It's not necessarily like a mystery thriller, really plot-focused novel. That's kind of happening in the background for all of these women. And it's just a very fascinating examination of misogyny and the long-term effects of like poverty and rural life and oil booms and oil towns in particular for women living in these towns. So I think this novel plays with and kind of explores the theme of like the temporality of oil in really fascinating ways, in that these men, you know, it talks about the camps that the men live in. If you're not like familiar with kind of the process of oil booms and fracking, and you know, like fracking today has a very similar trajectory in terms of like booms and busts of towns, particularly in like the northern North Dakota, South Dakota area of the United States. I'd recommend kind of looking into that a bit more. I think you would get even more out of this novel if you know a bit more about that kind of history and the culture of how these oil towns play out. So I think because of that knowledge that I have, I was able to see the themes of like temporality in Whittmore's discussion of like the tents that the men live in, how they come from kind of all over America, have really kind of raucous times in these towns and then leave suddenly. Whereas the women of the town are often, you know, they are native residents of the town, they've lived there for generations, and they are really stuck there because often, whether by force or by choice, they have become pregnant by men who have come to work at the oil fields, and, you know, they then, you know, have these families that are living there, and therefore they kind of re-enter this like cycle of poverty and teenage motherhood and that type of thing. So I think that was a really interesting kind of discussion of how oil fields are so gendered, and like of the consequences of the time spent in this oil town are impacted by men and women differently. I think this one was like really, really good. It was more of kind of a gritty writing style, which I sometimes don't vibe with, but I think Elizabeth Whittmore does a really good job. I'm pretty sure she's a graduate of the O.W.L.s. Yeah, she's a graduate of the O.W.L.s Writers Workshop, and I think you can really tell she has a lot of talent. Very excited to read more from her. She's an older debut author, which I also think is so fun. I think she has like a teenage son. She and her husband and her son live in Chicago, but she grew up in West Texas, I assume around the like 70s, because this feels very like an accurate portrayal of what life was like. So I'd be interested to like learn a bit more about her history and how it relates to this. But yeah, I would highly recommend this. Gave it 4 stars. If you're a Book of the Month member and you skipped out on this one, I would recommend picking it up. Oh, and this one I read for the divination prompt, which was to use a random number generator. So I picked 4 books on my like high priority TBR, and this one was the one that won that kind of random.org generation. So I'm excited that the divination prompt picked this one for me. So the next one I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry, which is my other April Book of the Month pick. I am very excited. I've been getting through a lot of my Book of the Month picks, as you'll see in tomorrow's video as well. I'm trying, my goal is to hopefully get them down by the end of May, but we'll see if I actually accomplish that. But this is a romance novel from Emily Henry. She has written kind of mystical, fantastical YA contemporaries in the past, so this is her first entrance into like adult romance as a genre, published by Berkeley, which, you know, is our kind of main, the OG, I don't want to say the OG, but, you know, the biggest, baddest be around the romance booktube community. I love Berkeley. I think they're doing really great things for the romance genre. They are like headlining this like cartoony romance cover, which is really what drew me into romance like 2 years ago. And but anyway, that was a total tangent unrelated to this book. So Beach Read follows 2 romance writers, one of whom writes romance, women's fiction type thing. It sounds like it's a bit more women's fiction-y, but I'm not entirely sure. Her name is January, and then the other one is Gus, and Gus writes very like gritty literary fiction, and the 2 of them meet in Michigan. Alright, editing, Jenny here again. They also went to the same creative writing program at the university. She calls it the U of M. I assume she means the University of Michigan. In my mind, the U of M means the University of Minnesota, but I don't think it's the University of Minnesota. But they met there originally, and they had this like one night where they like almost got together. So this is a classic second chance romance. Don't know why I'm so bad at describing the tropes of romance novels, but here we are. In a small town on the shores of Lake Michigan, after some personal tragedy has struck January's life, and so they basically have this bet that they will write the other one's genre and see who is able to have their books sold by the end of the summer. There's also a lot more to this novel. It's kind of an exploration of grief and finding secrets about people, and also kind of dealing with your past and reconciling your past with your future, and some other stuff like that. So this has been getting very, very high praise on BookTube. I know a lot of the romance readers that I follow here have just like been absolutely loving this one, but unfortunately it was kind of a disappointment for me, perhaps because their hype like got me so excited and then it just wasn't what I was anticipating, but it was fine. I mean, I think it's an enjoyable romance read, but it did not blow me out of the park. I think January and Gus are like enjoyable romance leads. I liked the premise well enough, but I think there was just something about their character dynamics and kind of how their characters interacted with one another through especially the second half of the novel that I just like didn't find as compelling as I did in the first like 150 pages. Additionally, Gus, so as I said, he writes this like really gritty literary fiction, which is exactly the type of literary fiction I hate. So he's writing in this book about like a cult, and it just sounds like really gritty, like kind of on the cusp of horror, but not really. I'm trying to think of a like real life literary fiction author who writes this, and I can't think of one. If I do think of one before I make this video public, I will like put someone's name down here, but it's just like really not the type of literary fiction I like. And part of this novel takes place with the 2 of them like going to visit this like place where a cult used to be, and those parts just like did not engage me literally at all. I would always dread those chapters coming, and I knew they were coming because it happened every Friday. And so yeah, in the end I was like, this is fine. I think also, and this is like so petty, but with romance novels I feel like sometimes you just gotta go there. I hated that her name was January. I feel like she could have had a nickname or anything, but no, everyone calls her January. Anyway, so this one was kind of a miss for me, but I'm like for sure in the minority here, so if it sounds interesting you will probably enjoy it. I just thought it was like fine. And then also I used this for the Defense Against the Dark Arts prompt, which was to read a book at the sea or coast. Technically, they're at a lake coast, but it's a coast nonetheless. There's beaches on Lake Michigan, so I'm gonna count it. It's fine. And then the last books that I read for my owls were the Check Please. This is written by and illustrated by Ngozi Kazu. I forgot to mention that. Year 1 and 2. If you buy these, so these are like the self-published version that my sister got me for my birthday. But if you buy the like traditionally published ones, this is like equivalent to volume 1. Like traditionally published ones are published by First Second, and the second volume is out now. So if you have read it, you can now read the second volume. And I think I will order the second volume. I have year 3, but I don't have year 4, and I kind of want to like read year 3 and 4 all at the same time. But these are super cute. I don't have a ton to say about them. They were originally published as a webcomic, so they're kind of like episodic in nature. There's not like a super fluid plot line, but they're really enjoyable. The art style's really cute. Here, let me see. And it's about this little baker boy who's from Georgia. Baker boy. He loves to make pies. And he also was a previous like ice skating, figure skating champion. And now he plays hockey for this team that it sounds like it's kind of a Yale, Harvard equivalent. It's outside of Boston, which there's like approximately 1 million schools in the Boston area, so could be any of them really. Called Samuel University, and he falls in love with someone else on the team. They're super cute. I don't really know what else to say. And I read these for my arithmancy prompt, which was to read a book outside your favorite genre, which graphic novels are not something I usually gravitate towards, but since my sister got these and said they were really cute, obviously I had to read them. So that is going to conclude the part 1 of my April wrap-up. Tune in tomorrow, fingers crossed, for part 2 of the wrap-up, which will include all the books that did not fit the O.W.L.s prompts, as well as what I'm currently reading. As always, please make a comment if you've read any of these books or want to talk to me about them. Additionally, if you have not subscribed to my channel, be sure to subscribe so you can see whenever I post new content. I'm trying to post mostly on Sundays, every Sunday, but some videos like this one will go up on other days. We'll kind of see as the weeks progress. Yeah, and I think that's about it. I will see you tomorrow, and have a great rest of your day.